Today we're going to discuss how to start a successful solar project with no money down and save $500 to $1,000 year one. We're also going to discuss cheap versus expensive solar systems. To kind of give you an idea, the first time I kind of got introduced to solar, I thought that the whole concept was kind of crazy and I didn't quite understand it. And it's not till I actually sat down and I started peeling back the onion before I started kind of understanding and getting a grasp of what solar was doing and why so many people have been putting up solar. Like for myself, when I sat down and I looked at this, I put solar up on my house 3 years ago, and part of what went into that decision is I started looking at, it's kind of I started diving in and I started looking at what the cost of power has been doing in Utah. This graph right here will give you an idea. So electricity is sold in what they call as a kilowatt hour, okay? And what you'll see is that this graph goes back to 1990 through 2014. And so a kilowatt hour is just basically it's just a unit of electricity. It's like a gallon of gas. And so when they're selling it at cents per kilowatt hour. And you can see that the cost of power right here is relatively stable. But what we've seen is just this massive uptick in the cost of power, up. And we saw that these huge rate increases have been starting to kick in and take place. We're seeing it in California. We're seeing it all across the United States. And it's actually become so significant that they started talking about it even in the newspaper. And so if you take and you look at, let me pull this up. So if you're in Utah, obviously you're familiar with Deseret News. Like Deseret News, the utility company did not necessarily want us to realize or recognize that we're having all these like significant rate increases and the cost of things just kept going up. So what they did is they actually went out and did their own independent study. And as you can see looking at this graph, they went and plotted out what the cost of power has done for consumers across the last, decade. And as you can see, there's just an increase and an increase and an increase and an increase. And we're seeing this across the board. In fact, the Salt Lake Tribune kind of jumped on the bandwagon trying to figure out what was going on. And you can see in here, this is talking about a rate increase. And in this rate increase, this was one that they published in 2012. The utility company wanted $172.3 million, or roughly a 10.5% rate increase. And as you can look over here at these graphs, they're getting these rate increases. In fact, this is not even the largest rate increase that we'd ever seen, because the other one was 172.3. This is Salt Lake Tribune, largest rate increase ever requested, $232.4 million. And they're looking for an 8 to 10% annual rate increase for the next decade. Now, when you see this, what do you think the chances are they got this, right? Utah, we sit in an environment where it's just a monopoly. And so they're getting these consistent rate increases. Now, when you're trying to figure out, okay, so I understand they're getting significant rate increases. Then the question is what is it that solar brings to the table that allows it to help us to avoid these rate increases? And the big thing that solar's got going for it, actually, I'll show you this, and then the answer will make sense immediately. Okay, right in here. So if you take and you look at the traditional system, how we take and we produce power, so you can see that you got the power plant here, and they'll transmit electricity across these power lines, and then it'll transmit or go into your house. What happens is if you've ever been underneath the power line, you hear this just really loud, crazy humming sound. It's a really loud sound. What you're really hearing is massive amount of energy being lost. In fact, the amount of energy being lost is so significant that out there in Wyoming, there was these 3 farmers, okay? And what they did is they actually had like some of their barbed wire fences and some of their equipment that was actually running underneath the power lines. And because there was so much energy being lost, they actually went and took and they had found a way to clip into the barbed wire fences and stuff and to actually pull that lost energy into their house, and they were actually using that to cover their utility power in their house. Now the utility company went out there and discovered it, but since they weren't actually stealing it because this was just being lost power, they couldn't do anything about it. It's actually so significant that if you were to go like some places, you know those great big incandescent light bulbs? If you were actually to take an incandescent light bulb and go out underneath one of those power lines, it will actually cause the incandescent light bulb to light up. Okay, That's energy being lost. Now, when it takes and it goes from here to here, the question is what percentage of power do you think actually gets lost in that transmission? I mean, take a guess. If I were you, I'd take and guess high, because almost everybody I present this to is always like shocked at how high it is. And so in this transmission, they lose about 66% of the electricity. Now, when the utility company loses 66% of the power, who actually picks up the tab for that power loss? It's us, right? And so when we do solar, the big secret behind solar is we will take and we will come, so here's a house, we will take and we'll put solar right here on the house and we'll bring it localized. And so when the power actually feeds down inside the house, it's traveling maybe 30 feet, something like that, and we have almost zero energy loss. And that's the secret. And so drop solar on the house, run it directly into the house. And this is the reason when we look at solar, I look at the solar option, this is why it will be impossible for the utility companies to actually ever beat the price in which we can deliver power to the consumer, because we literally bring it localized. We don't lose all that excess power. The other piece of it is when it takes, this is powered by sunlight, right? So the sunlight obviously comes in direct, takes and it powers the house. Now, here's one of the things that you don't need to worry about, because this is the next question I think will pop up. When you take and you feed power into the house, if you produce extra power, what it'll do is it will take this power and it will actually push it through the meter back to the grid. And on this meter, we can measure how much electricity is being pushed back to the grid so that we actually get credit for the energy that we push back to the grid. Now, if we find ourselves in a position where we're consuming more power, then like for a particular day we're consuming more power than what we're producing, it's okay, because we also have the meter where it can pull power from the grid. So in this case, we are consuming power in the cheapest manner possible, which is directly from our solar panels. And if we overproduce, we push it back, and if we need more, we can pull it from the grid, and this meter can take and measure it. That meter is actually called a net meter because it measures power going two directions. So that's the secret. That is the big secret behind why if I take and I put or help somebody to go solar, that from day one I can take and save them money by the mere fact that we just bring it local to the end consumer. Okay? So like when we sat down with we sat down with my dad and we looked at this. He was interested. He was 67 at the time. He was getting ready to retire. And the big thing is like if you're familiar with Social Security, or if you're on Social Security, you understand that you only get maybe say a 1% rate increase annually. But problem is that like inflation and all that stuff is far outpacing what you're actually getting as far as your increases on your pay. When you put solar on somebody's house, like in this example, like the sun comes out, does its job. A solar panel could care less about inflation. It doesn't care about anything. It has one job to do: produce electricity at the lowest cost. So even if everything else keeps going up in value, it does not cost more for us to produce electricity and to feed it into the house. And so where we were at with my dad is he's getting ready to retire, and he's stepping into a fixed income. He's trying to figure out, how do I stop, so to speak, the bleeding from these rate increases? And he's got his mortgage, so he's got his house, so his mortgage doesn't go up. Maybe the property taxes do, but his mortgage doesn't go up, so he's got that expense under control. Another one, like a necessity of life, if you ever think about it, what would it be like if you tried to live without electricity? Like I look at it and I almost feel like everybody in America is pretty much addicted to the product, right? And so since he's not going to go without electricity, he's like, how can I take and cut the cost of electricity? And the answer is he took and he put solar on his house, feeds directly into the house. Now he doesn't have to worry about these raising or increasing rate increases like I took and I showed you. So like on myself, I've actually got 8 kids. Seems like everybody leaves all their lights on and everything. And so the question I ran into is like, wait a minute, like how do I take and figure out how to stop, or how do I take and cap my expenses so that they don't keep going up? I mean, it's hard enough just taking care of 1 or 2 or 3 kids, but when I've got 8 kids and trying to take care of it makes it a little more complex, which means I have to pay a little bit more attention to some of these expenses like this. And so anyway, when I sat down on myself personally and I figured it out, I'm like, wow, I can actually save a ton of money by taking and putting solar on my house. So let's look at one of the big secrets behind solar. So when you get solar system, you can actually go solar with $0 down. Okay. Now you might be wondering, how is it that somebody could actually put solar up on their house for $0 down? What we've discovered is, in the good old days, we used to have to go out and have people get home equity loans or all kinds of different types of financing to be able to get their solar project. What we discovered is when we put solar up on somebody's house and we reduce their monthly expenses, the default rate has been so low that it actually became a far less risky asset for banks or what institutions to lend against, to the point that they've now allowed us to be able to come in and meet with a customer, take and reduce their power bill, and then keep them at a fixed rate so they don't keep seeing these rate increases. In fact, when you put solar on somebody's house, eventually when the solar system becomes paid off, the customer just owns it free and clear, and then they're not worrying about any of this rate increase or any payments. And so what they discovered is because solar created such a win-win across the board, that they've allowed us to step into it with homeowners that qualify and to allow them to get solar with zero money down. It was like a huge win for what we're trying to take and to do. And so that was one of the big secrets that we've been able to take and to do. So we've been able to get solar with no money down. Now, I want to make sure that I cover all my points. So you get money with no money down. The big thing is and then as you saw, like the utility rates come in here like this, you actually just come in here flat. Actually, it's below. You come in here flat. So the utility rates keep going up, up, up. The cost of power goes up like this. You actually come in cheaper than what you're currently paying your utility company. But then the thing pays off, and what you'll end up seeing is there's a spread that ends up showing up right in here in this big block right here. There's a big spread in savings that show up in here. Typically when I sit down and I run these numbers to try to figure out what this would actually help people do, I'm usually seeing somewhere between 50K in savings, depending on how much electricity you use and that size of your solar system, up to 120,000 K. Okay? And so $120,000. That's how big this spread is. And I usually calculate this over 25 years so that we can see what the savings would take and look like. But that is the big secret on it. Now, when we start looking at trying to figure out what kind of return on investment are we getting on this, what's really fun about solar is when you take and you put zero money down, but you get a return back like this. So you put zero in the denominator divided by 50K. It's kind of hard to calculate return on your investment if you did it based on zero. But what we're seeing is that this is probably one of the easiest investments that I've ever seen that gives customers one of the greatest returns that I've also ever seen without having to put any money down on it. It's like, I don't know, it's like heads I win, tails I win. Either way you flip the coin, you seem to come up a winner. Now, that's probably a big chunk of the secret behind solar. Like one of the things that we ran into is like you're saying, hey, I really want solar, I'm super excited about it, but in a few years I'll probably end up moving. Like that's one of the things that came up, and that's one of the things that we had to go figure out, okay, how do you take and to solve this? The way we've been able to sit down and solve this is like if you're, let me erase a couple things right here so we can take a look at this. So we're trying to figure out how do you take and solve this. What we did is we figured out how to make the loans transferable. So the new owner could step into the home and to be able to assume. And let's say that your average utility bill on your house right now, let's just say it's $100 a month. That's what you pay today, okay? What happens is every year, so year one, that utility rate would go up, in year two it would go up, in year three it would go up. And so you come out here to 10 years, let's just say you're at $150 a month on your power, okay? What happens is if we come in here and let's just say your solar came out to like $65 a month, okay? Like your $65 a month would actually stay at $65 a month to the point where when it's at $150 and you sell the house, the reality is the customer or whoever buys your house has got about almost $100, yeah, it's just under it, but there's almost $100 a month average difference of what they would actually take and pay. And this is the thing that gets exciting is that if you were to think about it, if you were to go out and to buy a house, and you know that the average utility bill is going to be about $150 a month, okay? And if you were to take and acquire this, but it actually came along with solar where you had $65 a month, and to boot, the $65 a month was actually almost ready to be paid off. So then at that point, you actually paid off the solar system and you actually get to net save the $150 a month. Like if somebody presented that to you as an opportunity, would you actually be excited about it? I know, right? Everybody would be excited. It's like who wouldn't want a deal where you get that net benefit? I mean, that's significant and it adds up and it compounds over time. And so that's one of the big secrets that we'll take and we'll run into. The other piece, now here's one that kind of popped up, and this is one of the things I want to be able to show you, cheap versus expensive solar systems. Okay? One of the things, I'm actually going to show you pictures of this so that you can see what I'm referring to. Okay? This is an example. This company right here, this is a customer that had actually signed up and they had actually purchased their solar system. Okay? They had signed up and they agreed to, their solar system was $19,618 per month, or $19,618 for their solar system. Now, both the state of Utah and the Fed are incentivizing people to do it, so there's all kinds of incentives in here that reduces the price. But when I sat down and I met with that same customer, I came in and I said, hey, I know that you already signed up with this company to be able to get your solar system. My question to you is would it be worth your time to take and work with somebody like me who is a wholesaler? And your same solar system would be $10,075. Would that be worth it to you? I mean, obviously you know what the customer said, right? They were like, what? Are you like for real? And so they were like super jazzed. I literally cut the cost of their solar system in half and they got the same benefit. What was even kind of more exciting is on this, it was going to take them about 2 to 3 months to get their solar system installed. And with us, with me, it was about just barely over 30 days. This is another one where I took and I went and I met with a customer. These guys had signed up for a solar system. Their solar system was $26,000. And this was actually one of my friends. I had taken, they were super familiar with solar. They lived in Eagle Mountain. They had solar. They absolutely loved it. When they sold their house sold for more than any other house in that neighborhood. It's really kind of funny how it happened. What happened is the new buyer came in. They were not familiar with solar, and so they were kind of asking about it. He's like, "What do you mean you're not familiar with solar?" So he went out into the street and he asked his neighbor. He's like, "Hey," he goes, "how much are you paying for your power?" And the guy's like, "I'm spending $198 a month on average for his power." And my friend was like, he goes, "I'm only spending $9." And the guy's like, "What?" He's like, "Yeah, I'm only spending $9 because he had a solar on it." Anyway, so his house sold more than all of his neighbors did. He was so jazzed, so that when I went out and I met with him, he already knew everything about solar. And when I went and met with him, I said, "Hey, this is what my numbers are." Like it was on the first visit. I just went and met with him, and we were just talking. And he asked me what my numbers were, and as soon as I showed it to him, he's like, "Okay, let's do it right now." I'm like, "Okay." So we took and we ended up putting solar up on his house. But he was so enthusiastic that this is actually his friends. His friends had already signed up to go solar. And he said, "Hey, Mike, hurry. I need you to go visit my friends. I just found out that they're doing solar, and I want to make sure that they're getting a good deal." And so I actually had gone over to these guys' house, and they agreed to buy solar for, it was like $26,000. And when I sat down with them and we ran the numbers, I came in at $18,000. So on this one, I reduced it by $8,000. What was fun about this is when I took and I did their solar system, put it into perspective. You know, they've got about a $95 a month electric bill. And when I did this, I got their solar, it was about $65 a month for their solar payment. And so you can see I dramatically reduced the cost of how much they were paying on a monthly basis, but I also significantly reduced the cost of the solar. And so when I took a look at cheap versus expensive solar systems, part of what you'll see that causes like certain of these companies to become very expensive is they don't take and they work on wholesale. They'll contact somebody like us who does who does wholesale. We'll take and we'll distribute the hardware to all these different companies, but then the companies, they come in, they buy the equipment, so they have to mark up the equipment. But then what you'll see, take an easy example, you can take Vivint. Like Vivint will have a guy that actually goes out and works. Then he's got a manager, so he's probably got a sales manager, then he's probably got a regional manager, and then he's got probably a director, and then he's got, when I've gone through and I've counted up the position, there's about 5 people, 5 layers of management, plus the overhead of the company that's all got to get factored into the purchase price of the solar system. And so by the time they get done adding all the stuff in, this is where I start seeing these huge deltas, about $8,000. Or I saw one just last week where they actually got a quote from, actually it was the same company. It was $28,000 for their solar system, and when I showed up, mine was actually only $14,000, and I think I had his monthly payment around $43 a month. But what you'll see is they have all of these different layers inside their management structure than their overhead. And when we've been working on wholesale, like we don't have layers of management. We don't have all this infrastructure like that. What we do have is we have like bare bones pricing so that we can afford to sell the equipment to the other solar companies. But what it does is it means that we don't have to sit here and mark everything up, and we don't have to work with 10 layers of management. And so when I take and I look at these two things, like if you're paying a lot for your solar system, like good on you. You're probably supporting maybe 10 extra families on that. But it's also your money. Like probably one of my favorite clients, he's a banker. He works at Zions Bank. When I sat down with him, he said, Mike, he says, he goes, this is really an easy decision for me. He goes, I love green. And he says, but I like the green that goes into my pocket. Like, I like saving the environment, and I'm willing to save the environment if it actually saves me money at the same time. And he goes, and so the reality is he goes, sitting down with you and looking at these numbers is actually super easy. He's like, all I have to do is see that it gives me savings, and if it does that thing, he's like, I'll totally do it. And so, like, literally that's what we did. We sat down, we penciled out the number, he looked at it, and he's like, Mike, that's ridiculous. He's like, of course I'm going to take and do that. He's like, you're saving me money month one, like day one. And is super jazzed. Like right across the street from him is another one of my friends who is an accountant. So he works at BYU, awesome accountant. And he sat down and he's like, Mike, he goes, basically it's the same thing. These guys are just, I love it. Like I get these money crunchers who want to sit down and analyze this stuff. And he's like, if this thing takes and gives me cash flow positive and it pays for itself and I don't have to put any money out of my own pocket into it, he's like, it totally makes sense. Why wouldn't I want to do that? And so as soon as I took and I ran the numbers for him and showed it to him, he's like, Mike, this is stupid. Of course I'm going to take and do it. And so we put solar up on his house. Let's see, who else have I taken and worked with? It was, well, here's one that was actually kind of shocking, is this particular gentleman, his wife is an accountant, and he was actually a coal miner. And when I talked to him, I said, hey, let's look at the solar stuff. He's like, Mike. He's like, dude, there's no chance whatsoever that I would be interested in solar. And I'm like, so why? And he says, Mike, he says, look, he's turned around and he's showing me the back of his shirt. And on the back of his shirt, it says, I support coal. And I'm like, oh, okay. So I was kind of curious. And so anyway, we started talking about that. And then, the next thing you know, he was curious. He was just curious to see what these numbers would look like or how they would take and do it. But one of the things that popped in this conversation is what he had done, because he had done a transition from one job to this other job, and he actually ended up pulling out a whole bunch of money out of his 401k. And so you know what happens when you do that, right? You actually end up getting pummeled by the IRS with something like a 40% tax. And so he was making $189 a month monthly payment to the IRS to pay for the taxes when he pulled this money out of his 401k. And I said, so I sat with him, I said, you realize that if you take and you do the solar project, right, that you will actually get incentives back. Like the state of Utah and the Fed are heavily encouraging people to take and to do solar. In fact, the Fed covers up to 26% of your solar system. and the state of Utah covers 1,600 of your solar system. And I'd mentioned this to him, and I said, like, these incentives that would come back would actually wipe out how much money you owe both the state of Utah and the IRS. And he's like, wait a minute. He's like, are you sure? I'm like, yeah. And so he went back and he did his homework and he checked it all out. And he's like, Mike, he goes, you know what? He said, most of the coal we dig up actually goes into steel versus actually doing the power plant. He goes, I can justify it now. And he's like, let's take it and we'll do it. And so, like, if you go on my Facebook page, Ask Solar Mike, you will be able to see, I'll put those videos out there, I'll actually show it. And you can actually see their video testimonials and stuff, whatnot. Because it's funny, like a complete transformation in how he took and he viewed it. Because all of a sudden, it became a matter of like, what is this doing for me? What is this doing for my family that's allowing me to take and to get ahead? And so it's kind of funny. I've gotten a kick out of doing this. I've actually even sat down with some clients. Like I'll run into a lot of do-it-yourselfers. And I'm like, do-it-yourself? I'm like, cool. What I will take and I'll do is I will just take and I'll sell you the hardware. Solar companies don't want to sell hardware because they have to buy it from us, mark it up, and then they take and then they want to take and install it. And so what I'd mentioned to him was like, hey, if you're interested in the solar, I mean, you look like you're a handy guy. If you want to take and do it yourself, I'll just sell you the hardware. And then you can take and do the installation yourself. And he's like, okay. He's like, hey, you know what? Better, let's run it this way. Why don't you run it for me, you selling me the hardware, and then you, like if you guys actually did the installation on it. And run it both ways so that I can take and see it. And so I did, took and I presented it to him. So here is your cost if we just sell you the hardware, you do the installation. And then here's what it would cost for us to do it. And when he looked at the two of them, the difference was so negligible that he just came to the conclusion. He's like, hey, why don't you guys take and do it? Because I don't want to actually climb up on the roof. I don't want to actually do the work. I don't want to actually have to get the permits. I don't want to have to work with the utility company. Like there's all of these additional steps and costs that actually come into a solar project that are outside of actually the hardware. And so when he looked at all that, he's like, hey, I've got like much better things to do with my time. In fact, I'd rather landscape my yard than to be the one responsible to make sure all this project gets done. So he says, you just take and do it. And I said, all right, that'll work out just fine. In fact, another client of mine, it was hilarious because when I stopped and I talked to him, he was a little skeptical at first. I mean, I've noticed that folks usually get a little skeptical about solar, and or they get skeptical about everything. But his son-in-law out on the west side of Utah Lake has got this massive dairy. In fact, they made the newspaper because they put in up like over $1 million worth of solar out there. And it was a huge project. And so the guy at least knew that solar made a whole lot of sense and he really liked it. But the big thing that he said is like, hey, he goes, I'm kind of on a budget. And he goes, I really don't have extra money to be pumping out into this thing so that I can buy a solar system. And when I sat down with him, like, hey, I kind of explained what I did here. I said, like, if I can get you approved, you actually don't even have to put any money down on it. You can just get the solar system with no money down. He's like, wait a minute. He goes, I didn't realize that. I'm like, I know, right? So we sat down and we looked at it, and we got done running the numbers and penciling it. He's like, Mike, this is so cheap. He goes, here's what I'm doing. He goes, so in my basement, I'm going to put an apartment down there. And not only that, I'm going to do, and he kind of started naming a couple different things that he was going to do. He's like, take it and give me extra solar panels. And so on his, we actually slid in, we added 4 additional solar panels on his home to account for where he was going to go in the future. And even after adding 4 additional solar panels, we were still less than what he's paying his utility company. And so he was like, Mike, he goes, I finally get it. This makes sense. And so we put the solar up on this house, and he's been super jazzed ever since when he did it. And so, I had the same thing. Another friend, he actually is, it's like, so if you like Coca-Cola, you go to any restaurants or whatnot in this whole valley, he actually is the guy that goes in and meets with the restaurants and negotiates so that Coke can be inside their facilities. And when we met with him, he's like, hey, he goes, I'm interested in solar, actually he was a little skeptical up front and had to kind of bring him up to speed about how no money down, it saves money, da 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 da. And after we kind of went through it, he's like, well, wait a minute, that actually is really interesting. And he goes, so here's what I'm gonna do. He had the same thing. He was gonna put a unit in his basement, so he has a rental. But his wife does a hair salon, and so she was gonna put a hair salon in the basement, and then he was gonna put in this massive theater room. It was like super cool. And so on his, he had me put 10 additional panels on his roof. And I'm like, wow, that was a lot. But still the same. On his, it only actually, when I added 10 additional payments, or panels, it only increased his payment slightly above what he's currently paying, but it positioned him so that when he starts really, really ramping up his costs, that it doesn't actually penalize him that much. In fact, that's kind of, that's one of the things I should mention, is like in his case, or like I've got another client that's putting in a hot tub, what you don't realize is when you take and you look at your utility bill, like when you buy your first block of power, it's one price, but if you use more power, they increase the price, and if you use more power, they increase it even more, so that in the end, the more power you use, you could end up paying twice as much for that power as you would if you were actually the low consumer. So when we put 10 additional panels on his, it actually significantly protected him for this massive spike he would have seen, and he still got the benefit of his payments just a little bit higher. But the cool thing is like in his case, because he's actually paying down his solar system so fast, because the interest rate on these things are like ridiculously low. It's paying down his interest, the principal on his thing so fast that his net cost is actually way less than it would be if he actually just paid his utility company. And so, like if you look at this, like if all this did was just help you, like if all this did is just help you reduce your monthly payment, like would it be worth it? Okay? Like if all this did is allow, you're getting ready to retire, if all this did is allowed you to take something you're addicted to, electricity, and allow you to own the system that produced electricity so that you could get rid of your power bill, like would that be worth it? I mean, if you think about it, if all this did is it just gave you extra money every month so that you could, like, I don't know, maybe you could save that extra money every month and just have a vacation. Like if all this did, that's a good example, all this did was to allow you to save the extra money every month and to actually have a funded vacation every year for like the rest of your life, would that be worth it? And so the question, like when it comes down to solar, is it's far simpler than people had realized, because you can actually get solar with no money down. One thing I didn't mention that's a perk is like when we can save like $500 to $1,000 a year, like one of the things that they've done on solar, because they know that these incentives are going to be given to us by both the state and the Fed, we can actually get up to 16 months of actually zero payments. Like zero payments for 16 months. And then after the 16 months, you get the incentives back, you apply it towards the solar, and then your payments are still less than what you were paying the utility company. And so like trying to get $500 to $1,000 year one is super easy to be able to do. To be able to get solar with no money down, like honestly, you have to have at least reasonable credit for me to be able to take and to do this. But we've actually had a lot of success in helping people do this. So if your credit's not perfect, I wouldn't worry. Just check with me, and then I can see if I can take and make this help. And then the other one, cheap versus expensive. This is one where you just got to decide kind of for yourself. Would you rather pay a lot of these different solar companies that got lots of layers of management? Would you rather pay out a whole lot of extra money? Probably could be in the range of $8,000 to $10,000 extra, depending on how much power you need. It could be as much as the one I saw, they came in at 28, I came in at 14,000. It's 14 grand different. Is it worth it to pay all that excess money out when you could have just had it for wholesale and not actually got stuck with that? In fact, it's one of my favorite things to do is when I go out and I meet different people. In fact, I'll even ask them, do you know anybody that is actually set up to take and to do solar? And that you're aware of that's going solar, because I'll go over there and I'll talk to them, and see how I could take them price with the wholesale and see if we can do them some good. Like just last night, the exact same thing happened, popped up. I went out there. I think the solar system that they had was quoted at 15,000 bucks. I came in at $7,000, and they're like, "Are you like for real?" I'm like, "I know, I'm for real. And to boot, you don't have payments for the first 16 months." And they're like, "Oh, sign me up, please." Like, would it be worth it to you not to have any utility payments for the first year? Like, your solar payments are like deferred for a year until you get the incentives back. Like, that's how you can easily get $500 to $1,000 year one, and then you save every year after that anyways. So anyway, if you're interested, you can reach out to me. You can reach at 520-390-8532. I'm Ask Solar Mike .org. AskSolarMike.org or 520-390-8532. Anyway, look forward to talking to you and helping you out if I can. Thanks.